We're entering an age of turnkey totalitarianism. Turnkey totalitarianism is a concept that things might be great right now in these technologies that enshroud us, from the surveillance-based technologies to the wide range of digital double-edged sword technologies that can be used against us when the time comes. It's widely believed that right now we still are able to indulge and enjoy with a relative amount of civil liberties. But you get to the point where you're in a situation where all they have to do is essentially turn a key. And then suddenly, all of those things that you were leveraging in order to enhance your life suddenly become weaponized against you. Okay, the self-driving car thing is one of the best examples. It's one of these things that's amazing. I've had a Tesla for years. Full self-driving it's out of this world. And until you experience it, you don't know what you're talking about. That said, that very technology can be used to lock up your car, seize up your vehicle, maybe get the car to drive you down to the police station, or whatever the case might be. It could be weaponized against you. There's always a catch-22, okay? And what they've done in Canada, very well-meaning people who are unfortunately conduits for malfeasance, have convinced people that self-defense is actually a bad thing. In Canada, contrary to popular belief, you can defend yourself using a firearm. However, it's, as far as I know, and this might not be completely accurate in terms of how it's litigated, but it's not considered a justifiable reason to own a firearm for self-defense. However, if there is a demonstrable threat of grievous bodily harm and you have a firearm that just so happens to be loaded at the time, you can use it to defend yourself. Now, again, don't walk away with this with any sort of legal advice, because it's a sticky issue and it's one that is still widely contested in the courts to this day. But understand that the first goal of any country who is on a trajectory towards tyranny is to convince people that self-defense is actually the essence of evil. And you guys know I'm not religious either. I'm an agnostic through and through, politically and religiously. But if I was the devil, just to give you an easy analogy to understand, if I was the devil and I wanted to take over the world, the first thing I would convince people of is that it's bad to defend yourself, that it's someone else's responsibility who is more knowledgeable than you. Okay? Now, a lot of liberals who subscribe to firearms confiscation, a lot of them virtue signal in this way, and a lot of them are actually well-meaning, believe it or not. I can tell you that most liberals who want guns to be taken away from firearms owners, they genuinely, mistakenly believe that these guns are a threat. Now, there's a reason why, and it goes deep. And I don't know how deep I want to get with this, but here's the gist of it. When you live in a high-rise building downtown and you have to have water pumped up 50 floors and electricity, and you rely on a very, very fragile and intricate global supply chain in order to feed that city that you live in which you are the uppermost part of that. You are the most dependent on that system. You are going to, whether you like it or not, whether you're aware of it or not, you're not going to be conscious that you're doing this, but you are going to view any sort of self-reliant person who potentially poses a threat to that system as anathema to that system. Understand what I'm saying here is that most people who are heavily plugged in and dependent on the system, and this is going to sound very Morpheus-like in the analogy, but they are going to have a knee-jerk reaction against anyone or anything that is a potential liability to that system. And what is a liability to that system? It's anybody who has self-reliant skills, not just firearms, but anybody whose backyard chicken farm might pose a threat to mass agriculture that they depend on. Again, these people won't consciously acknowledge this, but their knee-jerk reaction is going to be one of aversion towards any issue which actually empowers individuals. They'll say, I want to buy organic and save all the chickens and stuff like that, but they don't actually understand what it genuinely means. So there's a aversion to anybody who can take care of themselves, because in taking care of yourself, that's a variable that the government can't control. And this very elaborate, intricate global supply chain relies on control. And the more liabilities you have out there, the worse it gets. Now, guns are a big component of why most of these people in high-rise buildings, it's the biggest issue they take with this group. And their ability to protect themselves is something that doesn't sit well with people who have no ability to protect themselves, right? These are people who rely on the police. In fact, you could make the argument that they rely on an increasingly more militarized police, because as the system gets so complicated, they require even more efficient jackboot thuggery in order to enforce the laws, the more complicated laws, because of course, laws tend to only grow in amounts under these types of regimes. So understand that the first impulse of any living thing, the first imperative is self-preservation. You look at a bacteria under a microscope, it's trying to avoid being killed. That's its whole MO. Is avoid death, move towards things that empower you, and move away from things that are trying to kill you. And this individual drive towards self-defense, this is one of the cardinal instincts that has helped humanity survive over millennia. It is why they call it an inalienable right to defend yourself. Because again, if you can convince people that they don't have the right to defend themselves, then you can convince them of anything. If they can beat that instinct out of you, that you should have the ability to stop somebody, to stop a would-be attacker. Think about that for a second. How is that going to translate when some institution, some government, some bureaucracy comes after you? You're going to be conditioned to not defend yourself. Okay? So what they're doing right now is they're leveraging people's fears of these potential liabilities. Why do you need all these guns stored? Why do you need all this food? You know, people have this revulsion towards preppers. And I'm going to tell you why. It's because they fear the disparity that's going to occur should something happen, because in the backs of these people's mind, living in those high-rise buildings, they know full well how fragile the system is. And they know unconsciously at any time, they don't even, this is probably a thought they've never even actually consciously had, but they unconsciously know how unnatural it is of a certain set of circumstances for them to be in that high-rise building, getting all that heat and water and electricity pumped up there and having their animals shipped in from all around the world and their food and all this stuff, right? They understand on a visceral level how unnatural that is. And because their entire existence depends on the system, they'll do anything to protect that system, even if it means going against their own instincts, their own fundamental instinct to self-preserve. They will go against. That's why people will willingly walk into the gas chambers in the future. They will willingly, go into the euthanasia clinics in the future. They'll willingly sterilize themselves, okay, and inject themselves with whatever they're told to, because it's an extension of this. If you can convince somebody that somebody attacking you and you defending yourself is a bad thing, then you can get away with anything. So the malevolence with these people who, again, I'm not throwing shade. I was one of those people. I was one of you, okay, who didn't understand how supporting the militarization of police and the demilitarization of the public was a recipe for turnkey totalitarianism. I was one of those people who did not understand it when Ice-T said, I'll give up your firearm, or I'll give up my firearm when you give up yours. I couldn't understand that. I couldn't wrap my head around that, but it makes perfect sense. Let's say, for example, that you're a person who believes that George Floyd was treated wrongly and was killed and murdered by Derek Chauvin. Let's just assume that you of that belief. Okay, I'm not trying to create a political debate about it. I'm just trying to make a comparison here. Now, would you want the police to be more militarized or less militarized? What do you think is going to happen when they turn the tables on you? And this is why they call it turnkey totalitarianism, because every government law and regulation that is put into place can be used by the next government who might not be of your political choosing. And this is why you need to be very careful with the removal of your own rights and freedoms for so-called utilitarian purposes, because it may well be used against you when the tables do finally turn. So the malevolence of all of this is being a conduit for other elitist malfeasance, which basically gets its power from the centralization of control. As wealth becomes more consolidated in the hands of fewer and fewer people, you have to potentially be more and more paranoid and want more and more and more control over the system. And that is where we're heading. And so part of that is making sure that people have no ability to defend themselves, not just the ability, but have no desire to offend themselves. They want to actually inculcate you with the idea that self-preservation is inherently a bad thing and it's a threat to the collective. So this is why this is such an important issue for me personally, because I realize how integral it is to preparedness. Gun confiscation is not something that is benign. It is incredibly insidious. And while it may be some well-meaning people, and this is an olive branch I've always been willing to extend because I don't want them to dig their heels in. Because oftentimes what happens with this debate is that the people who are making sense, like I'm making now, overplay their hand and start lambasting the other side as being a bunch of idiots. And if you take that approach, it's only going to backfire. You're going to overplay your hand. So we can't take that approach with this, especially in Canada, where it's still a toss-up as to, the future of Canadian gun rights really does hang in the balance at this point. And if you can't try to communicate to people on a level that they can understand, we're going to lose our rights forever. Okay? So when I approach this with people on the left, I tell them, is it fair that the police, who I respect, but is it fair that they are increasingly becoming more militarized? Those same police who are going to crack down on you because you say free Palestine or you say free George Floyd, and this is what they don't want you to talk about in the media. They want this to be a tribalistic, divisive issue. But if everybody actually knew the truth, they knew the truth about why the Black Panthers were armed, why Malcolm X was armed, then maybe they would wake up to this and understand that this is not a political issue. There are plenty of wedge issues out there. This should not be one of them. Gun confiscation, whether your party's in charge or not, and whether you're just well-meaning, the road to hell was paved with good intentions. As trite as that saying is, it's the truth. It is insidious. And when you have the government trying to pass these inefficacious laws that make no sense, they actually don't do anything. It would be one thing if the laws actually reduce gun crime, which they don't. Okay, that's proven that they don't actually reduce gun crime. And even if they did, one could make the argument, so what? So what? There's a cost to having the ability to be free and to be able to weather a storm in whatever form it may take. Take self-driving